don't we? So today we're gonna go ahead with the article about exercising and physical activity, as well as physical inactivity, which is what we're gonna talk about today, and what evolutionary theory is saying about that, and in which way we were designed to exercise or not exercise. So yeah, what kinds of physical inactivity are humans adapted for? Humans were selected to be endurance athletes, but it is uncontroversial to state that humans are also adapted to rest whenever possible. Hunter-gatherers in camp usually sit on the ground, they have no chairs, do chores, take care of children, and engage in other activities that require little exertion. For example, Kalaria bushmen spend only, quote unquote, which is not the text but me, only 4 to 6 hours doing demanding work. Although it is possible to misinterpret such modest working hours as evidence that hunter-gatherers have it easy, energy allocation theory indicates that minimizing effort is actually adaptive in conditions with limited food. And yes, it makes sense. Why would you be pacing around all the fucking time if you don't have that much food laying around? Which, if you think about the present, is not the case. We are always having food around. Quite always, it depends on where you're living and who you are and stuff, but you know what I mean. It is axiomatic that organisms can use energy either for reproduction, growth, or maintenance, which includes activity. Since natural selection favors only adaptations that increase reproductive success, it follows that organisms are selected to divert energy toward reproduction whenever possible, and that excess energy spent on functions that do not lead to increased numbers of surviving offspring are maladaptive or maladaptive. In this context, it is hardly surprising that energetic data collected from a wide range of habitants indicate that hunter-gatherers rest whenever possible because they struggle to stay in energy balance. Average total energy expenditures, which is TEE, of hunter-gatherers are approximately 2,600 to 3,000 calories for males and 2 to 2,600 calories for females, or kilocalories. But females typically require approximately 1,000 to 2,000 additional calories because they are almost always pregnant or nursing, and they also need to supply food to both infants and children who are unable to forage on their own. However, acquiring this much energy is a challenge, especially for mothers who can reliably gather only about 2,000 calories and thus needs to be provisioned by others, including husbands and grandmothers. Although hunter-gatherers are usually able to stay close to energy balance, they undergo periodic stress, gaining and losing several kilograms between seasons of abundance and scarcity, and complaints of hunger are common. Studies of hunter-gatherer energy budgets further elucidate why it is reasonable to infer that humans were selected to avoid excess activity. Physical activity levels, calculated as TEE divided by resting metabolic rate, average 1.9 and 1.8 for male and female hunter-gatherers respectively, range 1.6 to 2.2, slightly lower than those for subsistence farmers, which average 2.1 for males and 1.9 for females. For males 2.1 to an average 2.1 for males and 1.9 for females, range 1.6 to 2.4, but considerably higher than that for post-industrial Americans, which average 1.6. These data have been used to argue that changes in diet, not physical activity, have been the dominant cause of recent energy surpluses, hence obesity in contemporary post-industrial humans. However, it is important to note that hunter-gatherers tend to have much smaller body mass than people in developed nations. So estimates of their activity and energy expenditure, which is TEE-RMR, relative to body mass indicate that they expand on average 30 kilocalories per kilogram, almost twice that of Americans, which is 17 kilocalories per kilogram. In other words, hunter-gatherers who are very physically active for only 4 to 6 hours per day are still nearly twice as active as people in post-industrial economies, which explains why they are under such strong selection to be inactive as much as possible. I know of no behavioral studies on activity or inactivity among hunter-gatherers, but predict that they are just as keen to avoid physical activity. The one important exception to this rule is play, a voluntary form of exercise unrelated to subsistence. Play is clearly an ancient adaptation, hardly unique to humans, that helps mostly non-adults learn athletic skills and develop appropriate physical capacities. In short, available data on energy budgets indicate that since hunter-gatherers are often close to the margin of energy balance, sometimes above and sometimes below, extraneous physical activity of the sort often considered exercise today, such as going for a jog, is usually maladaptive. In addition, the evidence suggests that humans, especially females, evolved to be specially adapted to store as much fat as possible to have sufficient energy reserves to reliably and consistently afford several unusually costly aspects of human biology, such as large brains and bodies, rapid rates of reproduction and delayed development, and the need for mothers to feed not only infants but also other dependent children. Like most mammals, other species of primates have only about 5% to 8% body fat, but lean hunter-gatherer males have 10 to 15% and females have 15 to 25%. Even so, the body mass index of hunter-gatherer is almost always below 23 kilograms. 23 I would say, because it is an index. Altogether, there was a strong selection for humans to be relatively fat compared with other primates, but regularly catabolized those stores as well as to engage in more physical activity than other primates, but also to rest whenever possible. Should I go through the next one as well? It's a bit too long, but it's actually very interesting. It's very interesting to see that, hunter-gatherers are, in terms of body fat percentage, it is quite the optimal one to be in. 10% is fairly low. This is something I have to admit. I don't know my body fat percentage. It's fairly low, but I would actually say it is quite 15, probably. I've always been lean. I'm in general a very lean person, which has upsides and downsides, of course. But yeah, very interesting to see that they usually around kind of the optimal body fat percentage. Because they say, but lean hunter-gatherer males, lean ones. So I assume that there have also been ones that weren't lean. Am I right with this assumption? Actually, not quite sure, but yeah, I do want to point out, the last, not paragraph, but the last section. Altogether, there was strong selection for humans to be relatively fat, which just makes sense, because storing energy makes sense, compared with other primates, but regularly catabolized those stores as well as to engage in more physical activity than other primates. Which means, okay, we are pretty good at storing it, but we're also pretty good at utilizing it, which means that if we take part in enough physical activity, and from time to time actually, that we are gonna probably stay in balance. What I'm seeing there is that even though it is like 4 to 6 hours per day of physical activity, and hunting and gathering probably is very, 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 very labor intensive. It probably is not something that's too easy to do, if this makes sense. But yeah, the rest of the day, they probably are resting. So what I'm thinking about right now is, okay, we have 4 to 6 hours of those 24 hours, or let's actually say, 16 hours, 16 hours because, they've probably been sleeping around 8 hours. I would say, because I mean, back in the days, and also for those tribes that are still existing, that are hunters and gatherers, they probably do sleep enough, unless there is reasons to not sleep, which, might be some predators, which might be something else. But normally, I don't necessarily think that they consciously wake up earlier. The question as well is, and I'm not sure, if they do have some alarms and whatnot, maybe, and probably the alarm is the sunlight. Okay, if the sun is shining, then I'm gonna get up, which by the way also makes sense if you're living in places where in winter months you're having very, very, very incredibly long nights and pretty short days. It makes sense in the sense of, okay, the conditions that you're living in, the conditions that you're finding yourself in are pretty tough and pretty hard. So it clearly makes sense to rest more and therefore sleep more, basically, because it is cold, you're burning off a lot of calories because it is cold, probably, and therefore it also makes sense to eat as much as you possibly can during the summer months. I don't surely know if I'm correct with this assumption, but it kind of makes sense in my head at least. But yeah, I think the problem is that we, don't quite do that, even though, as said, I mean, in winter months, you probably need a bit more fat, and because food is food is available, but getting the food is much more difficult than in the summer months because of weather conditions. And it is not the case right now, and therefore saying like, okay, when it is winter, you should be resting more. Well, yeah, maybe to some degree, yes, because it is cold and you have to warm yourself and your body has to warm itself, therefore expending more energy. But in general, we have food around. It's always important to consider the circumstances that we are finding ourselves in right now, and compared to the circumstances those people back in the days in ancient times, and also those that are in the present living as hunters and gatherers are finding themselves in, and not saying like, okay, this is what they did back in the day, so I'm going to do it as well because it is healthy, because it is what we were designed to do. We are also not living in those areas anymore, or in these circumstances. We're not having the same homes, we are not having the same society, we're not having the same opportunities. And yeah, it's always something to think about, and it really, it is really something that I've myself realized, because I also thought, and I've been talking about just, for quite some time, that, okay, it's very interesting what they did originally, and what we were designed to do. So this is probably something that we should be doing. But as I said, now times have changed and now it is different. So saying, okay, it is healthy because it is something that we were designed to do and it is something that we originally did, might not be quite correct. But yeah, gonna see you next time. Bye bye.